Millennials, what is something that other generations forget that we actually experienced? Story 1. We had to teach ourselves how to navigate the internet, then we had to teach our parents and our grandparents. Now we are trying to teach our kids. I really don't know how to impart 30 years of experience in spotting internet scams. Like, I can't tell you why, but I know if you click on that something bad is going to happen. Story 2. I miss going to the computer lab and knowing more about the computers than the teacher and admin. I remember setting the autocorrect on Word to change and into chickens and nobody could figure out how to change it back, so they just said you can't use that computer for Word anymore. Story 3. I've seen a lot of people say things like you probably don't know what this is with respect to things like landline phones, VHS tapes, cassette tapes, etc. Not only were all those things core millennial technologies that we all grew up with, I have memories of growing up with technology even older than that. My grandparents' houses still had rotary phones, typewriters and gramophones. Story 4. I'll start. I remember writing out essays by hand. Everyone seems to think that we always had laptops, but I remember the rules: only black or blue ink. If you made a mistake you had to write it over again. Sometimes you would run out of room on the line and have to cram in some word that you forgot. Story 5. Millennials, I am one, are funny in that we were raised at the crossing between the old era and the new one. When the internet and computers took hold, we've been part of both generational sides. Old-style flip phones and landlines, portable CD players for music, VHS tapes and blockbuster video. There was probably only one computer in the house and you shared it with the family. You were allowed to roam outside wherever you wanted without your parents thinking you'd be kidnapped. The existence of Furbies. Story 6. 911. For some reason, an older Gen Zer told me that if I'm a millennial there's no way I remember 911 because her kids are millennials and they were toddlers when it happened. I was 12. I remember it vividly. And it turns out, her kids are Gen Z. Why older Gen Zers and boomers think millennial just means someone younger. Story 7. Researching with books. I still remember diving into the stacks and archives to review books that have been out of print for decades to review an extremely niche topic, then having to wait weeks or months for an interlibrary loan for a different book that may or may not be relevant to my topic to cross-reference and check for biases. Story 8. Tons of places didn't accept card and were cash only, and more people carried loose cash on them. Now the reverse seems to be true where many places are card only, and less people seem to carry cash on them. Just a weird thought. There is so much I miss though, everything seemed more simple. I miss Blockbuster. Story 9. For the Americans especially, we were the ones who were in school when Columbine happened. There was a real loss of innocence that day, especially as a student. Of course it impacted teachers, parents and the broader community, but basically the entire millennial generation was at school while Gen X had all graduated and Gen Z were a bit young to have started. Story 10. Literally, all of society saying we need to go to college. I talked to so many people who are only 10 years older than me who try to say no one told people they had to go. Story 11. Not having laptops in university, handwriting lecture notes. I'm an older millennial mid-1980s, and when I went to university, we actually were given laptops, but my uni was very advanced that way, one of the most expensive in Canada at the time because of it, and was seen as very novel and unique. They were one of the first universities in Canada to integrate laptops into their programs, rather than just having a computer lab or computers in the library. But even with that, we usually weren't allowed to use our laptops in class and handwrote all lecture notes, and the professors didn't go slow for us like a lot of teachers in high school did. They went full steam, and you had to keep neat, tidy notes that you could use to study later, and do it fast. Story 12. Disney had a hold on us. They re-released all of the classics in the early 1990s and these movies became an integral part of our childhood. The Little Mermaid, Robin Hood, Snow White, Cinderella, Peter Pan, Pinocchio, Mary Poppins, etc. Disney soon took advantage of how popular they were and wrote an original story, The Lion King, and it was massive. Every dang kid on the block in the city, in the world, had a Simba and Nala obsession. It had a banger of a soundtrack too. Go sing any song from that movie and a millennial will chime in with all the words still memorized. We didn't have internet, streaming, YouTube, just movies to watch and re-watch. It's a huge contrast to my Gen Alpha kids who don't have any attachment to Disney movies. Story 13. Having to ask for a job or job application at the place you want to apply, and then the transition to online-only applications. That transition was so painful. My dad didn't believe most places went to online-only besides some small mom-pop restaurants I also already applied to and insisted that I had to ask for the manager to ask them to apply. The most humiliating thing in my life was him accompanying me to apply to places, and when I'd walk out and tell him they said do it online he walked back in with me, only to get told the same thing. Took 3 tries for him to silently just drive us back home. Story 14. I remember when bottled water became a mainstream thing. It was around before obviously, but I remember saying it was dumb to buy water when it was in fountains and taps for free. I was born in 1990 so I am not even an elder millennial. Story 15. You used to have a little bank book, written out by hand so you knew how much money you had in the bank. When you got paid you'd get a little envelope with your money cash inside and go into the bank to put some in your savings account. If you wanted to withdraw money you'd have to do the same. The teller would then write the details in your bank book. There were no ATMs. Story 16. We were all taught to be skeptical about anything found in the internet and confirm that sources were trustworthy. Ironically taught by boomer teachers. Now boomers believe any they see on Facebook with no basic critical thinking skills. Story 17, just how up my teens and early adulthood were. High school freshman year 1999, Columbine sophomore year 2000, Y2K panic Bush junior year 2001 to 911 anthrax scare Afghanistan war senior year 2002 DC sniper. I went to high school in Maryland. It was a thing college freshman year 2003, Iraq war announcement of the space shuttle retirement huge blow to me personally sophomore year 2004. Spain terror attacks my extended family lives their junior year 2005. Katrina senior year 2006 Mumbai terror attacks Pluto no longer a planet first. Few years working global recession, dad lost his job, saw people get paid off en masse, Lehman Brothers died, AIG taken over by the Fed, almost collapsed whole manufacturing sector of the US remember when the GOP was not pro-manufacturing. Because I certainly do. Oh, Occupy Wall Street one of my best friends is only 4 years older and when we compare notes she often marvels at just how much happened. She claims nothing happened when she was in high school but as she was in the deep south and B she was high as CA. So she may have missed a thing or two. Story 18 I used to go out by myself starting at like 8 years old after school, ride my bike about mile, hang out with friends with whom I'd ride all over town and meet up with other people at parks and such, then come home by dark or 7 p.m. for dinner. That was pretty normal. At the very least I think that's heavily frowned upon now. Story 19 we were the last generation to experience pre-internet and cell phone. We were the last generation to be trained in manufacturing by old school baby boomers. We were the last generation to talk and learn from people who experienced the Great War. Story 20 war. 21 years of it. People talk about MIs as being lazy, underappreciative and undeserving, while forgetting that too many have came back from Afghan or Iraq, essentially with shell shock, PTSD, severe depression and anxiety. And yeah, most folks will wave a flag around and thank the sky for their service, yet have this weird idealistic view of said war, producing 90-year-old veterans although we feel 90, I know, just feels weird longest war, literally spanning the entire current adulthood of MIs, but we're still viewed as ungrateful kids. Story 21 apparently the good folks in charge of companies like Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, and so on, we made those companies along with in touch Gen X heirs. They don't exist without us adopting their products and services. We started with FB, we were among the first to routinely use Amazon. We were the ones begging our parents for iPods and iMacs, and we were the ones line waiting to get the latest iPhone. The adults ahead of us all had Blackberries. The tech companies represented change, they were the disruptors. Now they've just become the companies they were disrupting and are even more exploitive to their customers and employees alike. Story 22 recession and being made redundant. We're old enough to remember the recession of 2008 and the impact it had on us. I was made redundant and most of my friends finished university and we all struggled to get jobs. I've had older generations saying things like, oh, you're lucky you didn't experience a recession. Yes, we did. Story 23 I remember when everything still had ashtrays. Smoking may have been banned in public spaces, but it took a while for public spaces to adjust their furniture and all sorts of other stuff to not include ashtrays and other smoking accessories. Eventually they all just became little trash bins that were never cleaned out. Like an open-faced Kinder Egg with wrappers or gum instead of a toy. Story 24 I recently had a boomer tell me I wasn't old enough to really feel or remember the impact of 911. Like what? I joined the military in December of 2001. My entire young adulthood revolved around 911. Story 25 I was born in 94. I'm never quite sure where that places me. But I remember growing up in an era of transition with technology rapidly advancing during my early life. And it's still going. The first Oculus Rift was being shown off at my university sophomore year when modern VR was still an emerging technology, and now I can't imagine not hanging out with people in VR chat. I have seen a home with one massive CRT and one landline pre-dial-up internet in the home to tapping on a picture of a keyboard on a glowing rectangle in my hands right now. Dial-up DSL high-speed fiber optic landlines, flip phones, smartphones, cassette tapes, CDs, MP3 players, Spotify VHS tapes, DVDs, Blu-ray, Netflix and the mail streaming becoming the new cable. There are so many more examples of how mind-bogglingly fast I have seen the world change around me. I still have an old collection of 2 megabytes 3.5 diskettes because I still have a working Sony Mavica, and in the same drawer I have a micro SD card that has a 128 gigabytes capacity. It is insane to see those two things next to each other. There's one thing that I miss about the lower tech, less connected era: you could relax. Now you are always reachable, so there's this pressure of an obligation to always be available to others. I forgot to pay my phone bill a couple months, and losing service for a couple weeks while I waited for payday was the most relaxed I have felt in years. My roommates complained about not being able to reach me when I left the house, and I told them I'd check Discord when I was somewhere with a free Wi-Fi hotspot. Everything is painfully immediate now. Instant responses, any restaurant delivered to your door, cameras on every street corner ready to send you a ticket for the most minor mistake. Cameras in every pocket ready to record anyone and anything. We have never had more capability to connect, and yet it has never felt like more of a performance. I feel more distant from others now than riding my bicycle to a friend's house miles away for the chance that they might be home and able to hang out. Unplugging would be so much more fun if it weren't also so isolating. Story 26 I was a teenager when smartphones came out. Now they're just a foregone conclusion. There are people nearing their 20s who were born after that. Story 27. We lived in an era before the internet. Everything is physical manual. You want to research something, you go to the library. If you're well off, you'll have an encyclopedia at home. How about just the meaning of a word? Now time to open that big dictionary. Want to know where you are and where you want to go? No Google Maps. Open that huge folded map. Want to learn more about your favorite celebrity? Nah, you'll have to buy magazines. Oh, you want to listen to that particular song? No Spotify or iTunes. You'll have to wait it in the radio. If you're well off, you could purchase a Walkman and record your own mixtape. Oh, you need to buy this particular model. No Amazon. Hop into my Toyota Celica. Well, go store branch hopping. Story 28911. Not only do I remember the event itself, I remember life before and I remember life after. I remember you could show up to the airport an hour before your flight, sometimes even less, and sometimes you could have people come to the gate to see you off even if they didn't have tickets and weren't your parents. Your uncle, your auntie, your best friend Steve, your grandparents could all come to the gate and wave goodbye down the jetway. I remember they'd only ask, did you pack your suitcase yourself? Nobody packed it for you. When you checked your bag, yes Linda, that pack job on my suitcase is all me, unfortunately. I remember you didn't have to take your shoes off. You only had to be ready to go through a metal detector, so belt and keys, leave the laptop in the bag, such innocent times. And once 911 happened, we had no protocol initially to make flying safer. Americans had never thought about it, but other countries had. The rules of what you could fly with would literally change every week. You have to check the website, and even then some agent from the newly formed TSA would insist the rule was something else and you'd have to throw out your Hydro Flask to pay $9 for a 16-ounce bottle of airport water. Back in my day we could drive up to the airport gate, you know? I actually did that. Got dropped off almost at my literal gate. It wasn't just a dream from Catch Me If You Can. Story 29. The optimism. At least for Americans, the 90s were pretty awesome. You had a sense that the problems of the past were gone and something bright and new was in the horizon. The Cold War was over. We were rebuilding the ozone layer. Wars were quick and done. Our president was cool. Space exploration was popular again. The internet computers were new and exciting. We were promised bright days and we believed them because the 90s were bright themselves. Having a sense of wonder and optimism in the future is not something later generations can relate to at all. In fact, it died for us in 2000 if not 2001. I hope we can return to that, but each decade since has been one dumpster fire after another, so I'm not holding my breath. Story 30. Working. Hear me out. I am not going to slam those young kids or work shy nonsense. I am 32M. My generation have had to battle seriously toxic work environments with traumatized boomer bosses. Now we are getting into the manager and SNR manager roles. We know how hard that decade of experience has been. Gen Z are so attuned to well-being and boundaries, good on them, that the top talent of that generation simply will not stand for what we did. Millennials on the whole are caring and accepting bosses because we know what it could be. We walked so they could run, and I am proud of our generation for that. Also, Trump the bloated sack of dehydrated. Story 31. I'm going to say the freedom we had as kids, or at least for me. There were no cell phones, so when I went out and played I was free and had so much fun. No internet to distract me. I just lived a life a kid should live. My parents trusted me and I roamed my small town on bicycles with my brother. It was the best, going exploring without answering to anyone. Got to experience the world around us without conflict or hesitation. Story 32. That we all lost our childhood on the same day. We showed up to middle school one day and watched 3,000 people die on live TV, and then things never got better. Our friends' older siblings went to war and came back up. 14 of our high school died from opiate overdoses. We graduated college in the worst recession in modern times, etc. There's so much millennials or cringe content mocking our desire for nostalgia. But did we get screwed, that when we were kids didn't have water bottles and neither did anyone, except plastic ones that you put in your bike, and we were thirsty, so thirsty. We'd each wait in line after gym class and kids would loudly count to 3 and you'd be kicked off. Story 33. I think other generations forget that a lot of us only had a slim selection of the nostalgic items. The rich kids had the Millennium Falcon and the NES and the action figures and the walkie-talkies. The rest of us might have had one of those at best, and our parents had to save a ton to get them. The kids in Stranger Things seem almost impossibly wealthy to me. Story 34. The scrambled on Channel 95 and the occasional crystal clear audio of said, bum fights DVDs, rotten. Completely and totally ad-free YouTube, regular light bulbs. When cars has a thermometer display, it was considered next-level technology. Gas stations actually smelling like gas. Couches used to be flower splatter leather that looked like chocolate frosted donuts. Fancy houses had intercom systems, roof-mounted TV antennas. Wrestling was entertaining. Arcades and malls sometimes more than one. Airwalk shoes were only allowed to be worn if you had a sponsorship, and playing hacky sack was our main source of cardio. War, the rise of school violence, the golden age of the internet, the pre-post 911 world, the millennium hysteria. Airports have changed so much. I remember taking full-sized bottles of Suave shampoo in my carry-on luggage, and my dad used to be able to walk me to my seat on the airplane and then watch my plane take off. Story 35. Not only did older millennials, my gen, get manipulated and tricked into going to war, but Rumsfeld and W were 100 testing the waters for bringing back the draft to do so, and from what I remember, it was the baby boomer generation that basically shot that down. So I always kind of remember at least that when we on boomers. Not that they don't deserve it. I mean, they didn't exactly do us any favors. You could argue sparing us from a military draft was basically the least they could have done, especially since they turned around and continued in ramblings, sorry. Story 36. My first real memory of international news was the Persian Gulf War, watching CNN constantly and telling my mom about each Scud attack. 19 years later I was in Iraq myself. In high school I would say that every generation had to pay the price for freedom and that ours hadn't had that yet. Well, I guess we got ours. Story 37. 9/11. Seeing Gen Z praising Osama's letter last year was mind-boggling for me. Watching it on the TV as a kid with absolute horror and seeing that hole in the skyline when I went to visit family was surreal. I remember how fun visiting those towers were, and they were destroyed by terrorism, and you have people sympathizing with terrorists. Ugh. Story 38. When your parents rented a Disney movie and you got upset because it was one of those live-actions ones like The Barefoot Executive with Kurt Russell instead of Lady and The Born in '94, so on the tail end of the millennial train. At least where I'm from, many people still took computers as passing trend, so they didn't bother to teach us about them at school. We were never taught blind typing or any computer literacy. Everything you learned was on your own. They implemented a bunch of IT-related courses in primary schools for generations after me though. But from what I hear, the newer generations have troubles navigating computers because they learned everything from their phone, not their computers. I have a friend that said they got a new 18-something yo hire at their work, and she has no idea how anything around a computer works. I'm talking dinosaur typing, not knowing what Word or Excel are, not knowing how to copy-paste, basically. Everything you had to teach your grandma, you now have to teach the younger coworkers, not trying to generalize or look down on younger generations, but I feel their focus was on other things, not computers. Story 39. Technically, I'm Gen X by a couple of weeks, but I bet many millennials can relate getting a tape deck adapter for your portable CD player, because your car only plays cassette tapes, and then carefully maneuvering around bumps in the road to avoid having the thing skip every other second. Bonus points for keeping folders upon folders for CDs in your car, but spreading them out all over the back seat instead. Story 40. TV station signing off. I still remember Cartoon Network signing off at 9 or 10 p.m. and AMC signing on. That was how I knew it was sleep time for me as a kid. Also, film photography, actually having to bring around a separate camera from your phone and taking the film to a studio when it's used up. Having to wait for the photos and being asked if you wanted the negatives. And as someone who lives in the Philippines, cool weather in the city during December to March, like, it was jacket weather cold. Some of my own peers forget it even existed anymore, but I remember it vividly as I'm prone to getting sniffles when I'm cold ill. These days we're pretty lucky if temps dip below 30 C. Story 41. A little outside millennials, but always thought how hard it would have been living through the Cold War and fearing complete nuclear annihilation, never knowing if it could be everyone's last day on Earth. I know it's an outdated way of looking at nuclear war, but that was what they thought at the time. Story 42. Getting to experience an internet that actually worked, then watching the older generation go from you can't trust anything you see or anyone you meet from the internet, to them forgetting every one of those warnings, and now they believe anything they read on their phones. They wonder why millennials seem to have so many left-leaning people, but it's because we used to be able to just access information without jumping through hoops and wading through bullshit. For a little while there, you could really learn about the world on your own terms. You didn't have a zillion people with a chip on their shoulder endlessly repeating their feelings and emotions on things as if it was established scientific fact. Even when it was conspiracy stuff, politically captured nut jobs weren't the norm. Story 43. I was born in '90, so, as middle-of-the-road millennial as you're going to get, and I got a taste of the world before the internet. As someone who has crafted their whole life around the internet, my hobbies, entertainment, further education, all are extremely internet-dependent. I pity people who will never experience the non-hyper-connected world, being out without a mobile phone, not being constantly online, constantly available, constantly stimulated, constantly bombarded with negative news because anger and shock drive engagement. Life was slower. I miss it. I often wonder how much of it is rose-tinted glasses, and how much of it is a yearning for a slower life. Summer holidays felt like a lifetime. Now 2 weeks off feels like a weekend. I sometimes think the internet was a mistake. I don't think humans were ready for that level of hyperconnection, being painfully and acutely aware of all aspects of life from all corners of the world, the good, the bad, the ugly and the downright evil. In the age of information, ignorance is a choice. I used to think humanity was destined for Star Trek. Now I think we'll be lucky to get Mad Max. The confident and ignorant are shouting the loudest, and the meek and ignorant are listening. I feel like we all keep expecting truth and decency to win over violence and hate. But the hateful and violent don't care for truth and decency. All they know is violence and power. I hope we fight fire with fire before it's too late. Story 44. I genuinely think millennials had the best pop culture for teens and tweens. The television shows, the toys and commercials, the snacks and food, the music, the clothing, the boy bands and pop stars, teen celebrities. The 80s, 90s and early 2000s were unmatched. We actually got to have a childhood in teenhood, and I think it was relatively age-appropriate. I was the tail end of the millennials, but I grew up with Zoe 101, The Lizzie McGuire Show, going to La Senza and Garage, and it was catered to a young generation, and it was all just fun. I feel bad for my kids now. Things are either super childish, like Mrs. Rachel and Paw Patrol and PJ Masks, And then there's this massive gap for young kids and tweens. There's no fun boy bands or kid-friendly music that sounds good. There's no good teen shows or movies like High School Musical or Hannah Montana. Cloth stores aren't catered to tweens. Now we have influencers and young people online like Piper Raquel just watched that doc, and they're so chronically online and post like they are adults. There's bop houses and trad wives and all this crazy online that I'm sure our young people watch, but it's not exactly age appropriate anymore. Look at shows like Euphoria. That's for teens, but it's so explicit and graphic. Anyway, it's really a shame. We complain that our kids are growing up too fast, that they are always online and on social media, and it's like, yeah, well, what do you expect them to do when the world has completely forgotten about that phase in life and there's no pop culture to really mold them? I think it's why millennials still seem like big kids, because we had so much content that allowed us to have fun, to have interests and really enjoy those kinds of things. Story 45. No internet, or if had it was slow, had to use paper atlas maps, not phones. Phones were dumb, could not do much on them, youngish and go through first terrorist attack on your country and start of a war, but maybe didn't understand it, had to play games loaded from CDs, watch movies on discs or tape. Cameras actually used film. Recording songs off the radio to cassettes, saving things to crazy small space on 3-5 floppy disks, using things like Palm Pilots, Alpha smart computers in school. Story 46. The advent of smartphones. Everybody takes having the internet in your hand all day for granted, but they weren't ubiquitous until I was halfway through high school. Story 47. During summer my parents used to kick us out of the house at 9 a.m. and tell us not to come back until the sun was going down. I would jump in a nearby dried-out creek bed and use that to get around the city and hit different skate spots until we got kicked out. Lots of memories of sitting in the shade listening to Alkaline Trio, Blink 182, Offspring and skating 12 hours a day. Good times. Seems crazy these days to just let 12-year-olds wander like that. Story 48. Phones with cords. Playing outside until street lamps turned off. If you had a show you wanted to watch, you had to show up and hold it even if you had to pee so bad. Sounds horrible, but I kind of miss that. Story 49. Lots of my school wasn't done on the computer. I had to handwrite papers. We had a computer lab and used them sometimes, but we did lots the old-fashioned way. Story 50. I think one of the issues is that about a decade ago, there were always articles about millennials ruining things. Dumbass, for some reason, started to automatically associate millennial with young, even though we were mostly in our 30s at that time. I remember another 30-year-old bitching about the millennials on Facebook and was in total denial when it was explained that he was one. Dial-up, no search engines, Palm Pilots is the big fancy thing, flip phones, especially ones with style, and being born in the 90s, some of us anyway. Story 51. The Y2K bug. I remember standing outside with family and neighbors to see if planes would fall out of the sky, lol. But there was a bunch of hysteria on the news for months in 1999. Story 52. You were bullied to if you liked anime. God forbid you had a DBZ character on your folder or drew Sailor Moon for your art project. You'd be a social pariah so fast. Story 53. Younger millennial here, 95. But I remember smoking in buildings restaurants well until 2005, completely banning the option, smoking or non-smoking. Story 54. Say what you will, but we created our own generation of fashion and music styles. Not saying it was great and low-rise jeans can go do one, but we were probably the last generation to do that. Gen Z are very lost in a lot of senses, and I think growing up on screens and social media has stunted their ability to be individual and have a sense of originality. The fact that they have to pull their fashion styles from generations that have come before says a lot. It's why all their music sounds the same. There's no flair on the charts anymore. When we were in our teens, you had everything from hip-hop to pop, rock and house music on the charts. That's all gone now with mass streamers, social media algorithms and viral TikToks. Story 55. If you wanted to watch something on TV, you had to watch it during the time slot it played on a given channel. Due to this, the plot for each episode for a show was more or less wrapped up by the end of the episode, so if you missed the next episode it wasn't a big deal. Story 56. Yelling at my sister to get off the phone so I can use the computer, lol, or renting VHS movies and owning a little red car that would rewind the tapes to the beginning. Story 57. Millennials experience the end of the analog age. Audio tapes, VHS, perhaps even vinyl if our parents had a record player. Our cars had wind-up windows and manual seat adjustments, especially our first cars, which were ATS 90 shitboxes. My first car had fuel injection, but my brother's was carbureted. No ABS, no traction control, and manuals were more the norm. I remember watching Tom Jerry on Betamax. That's how far back I go with computers. The older ones among us used to use the command prompt. My brother had set up a boot disk with an alternate auto exec. Bet that loaded fewer drivers to free up enough expanded memory so that we could play specific DOS games. Back then, memory was measured in kilobytes. Yeah, we had to hack the computer's startup process just to get games to run, and we were barely 10 years old doing it. The first computer screen we had at home was monochrome matrix screen. Getting color was a big deal. That most all of us have grown up around computers in one form or another since birth. My dad was middle management for a photocopy manufacturer in the 80s and 90s. We had a computer in the house for him to work on. I have never known life without a computer. An older coworker of mine recently had a photo she had taken on the wall at an art gallery exhibit, and my partner and I went on opening night to show support. While we were speaking with her, I asked her what she had done to the photo based on its description, and said that the exhibit was making me want to get back into photography. She told me she had used Photoshop and utilized its layers feature. She was also very encouraging and told me that she would be happy to help me learn how to use Photoshop should I be interested. I didn't have the heart to tell her I'd taken a whole class on Photoshop and Illustrator in high school and had last used Lightroom when I was more seriously doing photography, so I just said thank you, that'd be great. Story 58 Flash Cartoons. All Your Base, YTMND, Ikana Skiesberger, Rage Comics. Wojak is like what Rage Comics' life became after they met a stranger who got them hooked on heroin. Story 59 I remember when people were losing their minds over credit or debit cards or the chips in them, thinking that the world was going to end and Jesus was coming back. Story 60 Dialing up to the internet meant that no one could call your landline phone. I deliberately dialed up to the internet when skipping school so that my teacher couldn't call my parents. Story 61 Wearing masks during COVID. I absolutely hated it, and that dry poopy smell that follows you around all day with them. And I don't mean it just smells bad, it legit smells like straight feces. I hate masks and am never wearing one again. Story 62 The internet was a different animal back then. The AOL sound still gives you PTSD. You get extra annoyed if someone unplugs the telephone plug, even though you have a fiber optic cable beside you for internet. Story 63 That we've dealt with so many recessions. When articles come out about how we aren't owning property or spending money the way businesses want us to, I always think about how we came up during pretty much back-to-back recessions. Story 64 As a kid I always walked past the 18 DVDs. There was a DVD put in front of them that said 18. Always took a sneaky look. Hard to imagine corn on a shelf at a normal place like this nowadays. Story 65 Waiting to record a song on the radio. I can remember pushing the glass cover with a small magnet at the corner to access the stereo. I waited with my finger on the red, make sure I got the entire song. Story 66 Adulthood. Millennials are in their 30s and 40s. We are adults, we know how the world works, better than the older generations now as it's changed so much from their youth. The media still readily paints us as college kids and infantilizes us. Story 67 M33. I remember going to Walmart when I was a kid and being told I can pick one video game. It was either Rugrats for PS1 or Animaniacs for Sega Genesis. I got Animaniacs. Story 68 I remember, and there are still a few around all the indoor smoking places. Nothing like a half wall in a Waffle House separating the smoking and non-smoking sections. Story 69 1 The rise of grunge music and indie artists being featured on MTV right alongside big artists of the time. It was of a decade for women in music. 2 Courtney Love, Alanis, Jewel, Tori Amos, Garbage, Jill Sobol and many more. 2 The controversy surrounding Beavis and violence on TV. Plus Cher teaming up with Beavis and to sing I Got You Babe. 3 The tragic death of Brandon Lee while filming The Crow, the only version that matters. Frankly 4 network-specific shows that featured a movie with commentary by a host like Joe Bob Briggs' Monster Vision on TNT. Dinner A Movie on TBS hosted by Paul and Annabelle, and You Sass Up All Night hosted by Gilbert Gottfried. 5 shows being on specific nights, so you have to catch it while it was on or you'd have to wait for the rerun.
Life without smartphone and the internet.